Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Just have to say, got it, don't we?
Got it. There we are. Well, good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about our work in what I've called conservation-led regeneration. And the reason I do that is because those of us who work with existing buildings rather than new buildings have an awkward choice of words like refurbishment, restoration. In America, they call it adaptive reuse. And now the AJ has come up with retro first, which is a particularly clunky expression. So I'm calling it conservation-led regeneration because conservation means the sustainable reuse of existing buildings. And I think everyone is becoming much more conscious of the fact that existing buildings, the capital carbon equation about how much embodied energy is in those buildings that you chuck away when you rebuild them has become far more, people are far more aware of. And regeneration, because I believe that the reuse of historic buildings can contribute very much to the regeneration of areas. And so having, as it were, explained the title, I'd like to go back to when I first, as a relatively newly qualified architect, moved back to London to work with Julian Harrop, who you may know of as the architect at the Neues Museum in Berlin with Chipperfield, and architect for restoring the Soane Museum over many years. And Julian had, as it were, East London wrapped up. He started off with saving buildings in Spitalfields with the Spitalfields Trust. And when I went to work with him, nearly all the work was within derelict buildings in East London. And as was mentioned at the beginning, I had the good fortune to work on Sutton House, which was then derelict, the National Trust House in Hackney. So on my own behalf, as it were, I seem to have managed to carry on doing quite a lot of work in East London on derelict buildings. And they are wonderful because in East London, they haven't been done over so many times as in West London. A degree of dereliction means that you can do an absolutely comprehensive job in renewing services, reinventing the purpose and so on. And in particular, with the growth of the Heritage Lottery Fund, there's been the funds to take such a comprehensive look, which wasn't there perhaps earlier on. So I'm going to start with Toynbee Hall. Now, Toynbee Hall, I don't know how many of you have come across, but it was founded, it's in Whitechapel. It was founded in the 1880s by Canon Barnett, who you can see in the middle there. Let me just try and get a pointer. There's Canon Barnett, surrounded by the volunteers. The volunteers all came from Oxbridge colleges at that stage, and they volunteered to give their services in education and welfare for the poorest people in East London in this organisation set up by Canon Barnett and funded by Barnett's wife, Henrietta Barnett. And so just to explain where it was at the time, the circle here represents Toynbee Hall. And you can see that this is Whitechapel High Street, and this is Commercial Street. And there was a gatehouse building, just like an Oxbridge College, and you went through into a courtyard with a building behind, which was Toynbee Hall proper. And I've superimposed this on the Booth poverty map, which you presumably know about, which is colored up according to the degree of wealth or poverty of the areas in question. Sorry, should have got rid of that one. And just to put it in context, red like that represents fairly well-to-do. And then the opposite extreme, which is black, which is all around here, is what Booth described as being vicious criminal classes. So it's pretty remarkable that this settlement was founded right in the middle of Whitechapel at the time of, on the right, there were the Jack the Ripper murders, which this is a map identifying the place where various murders took place, and there's White Toynbee Hall. So it was a rather extraordinary venture in bringing civilization to the East End, and indeed Barnet got accused by some people of a sort of patronizing attitude. But nevertheless, it carried on with this extraordinary mix. This is the Ordnance Survey map of 1894, and here's the gatehouse, the courtyard, and the hall, and it's wrapped around there. But you'll also notice it's entirely landlocked. It's entirely within a site bounded by other buildings. This is the way that it looked as built in 1884. The architect, someone you probably haven't heard of, called Elijah Hoole, and 1884. And at first glance, it's a sort of Tudorish revival mullioned and transom building. But when you look at the chimney stacks, they're straight up to the minute Norman Shaw type aesthetic movement, Queen Anne, Old English articulation of the stacks. And then formally speaking, you'll see that you get two large gables and one small gable. And that became relevant for our work later on. Here is Norman Shaw's great building of Lowther Lodge on the south side of Regent's of Hyde Park, and you can see these great striated chimney stacks. And this was absolutely the new thing in the later 1870s, 1880s. Toynbee Hall is 1884. And so I think my impression is that Elijah Hall was very much more up to the minute than people have ever given credit for. Not least because when you go inside, it's quite remarkable because, you know, this is the dining room in 1885, and you get William Morris rush seated chairs. You get a rather aesthetic movement sideboard, and you get pots displayed on your shelves and on the top of the things, and you get your aspidistra in the bowl in the middle, and it's really rather wonderful. But when you get to the drawing room, it's even more wonderful because you can see on the left here that we have these tiered basically china display shelves either side of the mirror. And then you get some Godwin style aesthetic tables, which would have been black ebonized. In the photograph here, you can see another ebonized sideboard with blue and white perhaps. And even more remarkably, I think that these are Japanese prints in their elongated scale that you would never have found before that, I think. And below it, we have the volunteers from the university settlement entertaining their girlfriends, apparently with latest frocks. And look at this chap with his green velvet suit. I mean, it's really, really greenery gallery, very effete young man stuff. And then when we look at the staircase, you probably know there's a 17th century tradition of foliage, wreathed foliage, balustrades. In this case, it's fretted. It's fretted out of solid timber about 3 inches thick. And in this photograph, there are a whole lot of leaves missing because they've been broken off across the grain. But you can see here what it was like. Now, I think that this is very much related to McMurdo, who was very much the cutting edge of stylistic development in the 1880s. And this is his famous book, The Wren City Churches, which were being threatened with demolition at the time. And the cover of this book has got its whiplash sort of vegetable foliage, which Pevsner refers to as being, you know, the origins, or one of the first manifestations of Art Nouveau, interestingly. And here we have McMurdo again doing the same sort of thing in a fretted back to a chair, which is in the William Morris Gallery in Walthamstow. So I think, you know, that must have been in his mind. Anyway, there was bomb damage in the Second World War, which hit out all of the houses, which had then been, or the warehouses, which had been along Commercial Street. And the site of those buildings became a public garden called Mallan Gardens, which was mainly down at the level of the basements of the pre-existing buildings, therefore it's entirely sort of inaccessible. And then you came up through here. This is the, it also took out the gatehouse, so that was demolished. And they built another building on this site, Profumo House, because I should have said the people who were associated with Toynbee Hall over the years included Beveridge, who may well have drafted out some of the social legislation after the war, and then Profumo, who volunteered here after the scandal. And from my point of view, most interestingly, C.R. Ashby, who I'll talk a bit more about later on. So this is what it looked like before we started. At the back, there had been sort of various sort of additions, and everything was sort of pretty much of a mess, really. And the lecture hall on the right was in a reasonable state, but with horrible curtains and of a mess. And this is what it was like in its heyday, with the in use as a lecture hall for the local, in this case, men. No sign of a woman in any of the photographs I've seen, I'm afraid. And then in the dining room, it was redecorated by C.R. Ashby in the 1890s. And this, I think, is a photograph from before his redecoration. You can see sort of rather flowery devices on the wall. And then these are all the Oxbridge College crests forming a frieze around the top of the wall. And then this is what it looked like when, before we started. It had been redecorated in a color scheme which was supposed to represent what they had originally intended. And then there'd been a lighting track put across the front of these rather wonderful cast iron columns, which are actually the only thing that's holding up the whole of the first floor is these two sets of two columns between the dining room and the lecture room that you just saw. When Ashby redecorated, he used a circular motif representing the tree of life. And I think you can just see here that the trunk goes and it branches out into two branches which are intertwined. and the shape is very much the Egyptian Ankh symbol, the symbol of eternal life. So I think that's what is in mind, obviously attached to the idea of nature, and thirdly, perhaps the idea of the Japanese pie, the sort of circular devices that were popular in Japanese decoration. This is the interior before we started. The ground floor corridor linking the two lecture rooms, the former dining room and the lecture room, solid. And then the upper floor basically abandoned for the previous 15 years with water pouring in everywhere. And so that was over a couple more, birds nesting or fallen out of the roof, I'm not quite sure. Things stripped out. Anyway, that wonderful thing about dereliction you get when you go to work with a building that hasn't been messed up for 15 years. So on the first floor, the stripping out in order to create offices for the organization, you can see just that there's this room in the middle of the plan, which was where the volunteers had a sort of common room. And then there was a corridor around it serving what would have been individual study bedrooms around the outside. They all lived on site. So how did it work? Well, this is the original plan, and Whitechapel High Street, Commercial Street is down here, and you came in this direction, and if you were going to a lecture, you went through the Gothic doorway here, and you didn't engage with anything else at all. And then everything else was for the volunteers, and here you had the entrance, vestibule, cloakroom, the drawing room that I showed you earlier, then three little study sitting rooms, corridor leading to the dining hall, which I've shown you, and then the rest was service accommodation. And this is what had happened to it when we started. That is the dining room and lecture room, and the drawing room wrapping around, the corridor inside the wall, previous back wall, as it was historically, and then rooms outside it. And this was a master plan that we devised, which was that you did a land swap. So the land in front of the Toynbee Hall would be swapped with this land here, and then you get a larger public square, and you got the site for a building which would help pay for this building. Well, and then here's Profumo House, which is the social side of things. That fell through because of the scandal about the mayor of Tower Hamlets, if you recall, who was seen to be corrupt and embezzling money. And so the idea of anything being sold by the council to anyone else was total anathema. So nevertheless, we survived, and the whole of the buildings around the outside were redeveloped for housing by another architect while we were trying to get on with this in the middle, which was absolute hell, as you can imagine, from a building point of view. So my main move was to make the entrance where you could see it straight from the street by combining those three little rooms into one big entrance hall, and then move the circulation outside the back wall rather than inside the back wall, leading to a crush hall here, the two lecture rooms, then a third hall here, and then this is the kitchen, and that's a fourth meeting room, breakout room. And then on the first floor, you actually get two different levels because the halls are half a story higher than the new first floor. So you go up the historic staircase here, you either go straight ahead into the offices or you turn right into our new building. And this is education rooms, meeting rooms, and so on, loos, plant room, and then still some accommodation on site for the volunteers or people doing particular projects at Toynbee Hall. So there's a flat for two-bedroom flat here, and then in the two second floor gables, that is the room, which is the common room, which pushes through, and then you get the another flat here with for three to sleep. And to make that work, we had to break through with a corridor cutting through both gables to link the two things together, which were previously separate. Then the rear elevation, I was very keen to follow the sort of gable language of the original, and having two gables for one big gable, and then a fifth gable here, which actually slices off down the corner. And that is now what it looks like from the front. This building have been rebuilt by others. We've repaired and restored the front. We've added back the fifth gable here with a slightly asymmetric design. And then here is the new front door in place of one of the windows. So it's clearly visible from when you come in. And that's a view of the back as built, with the education and meeting rooms here with their own sort of terrace at the back. I should say that the idea of five gables comes from Standen by Philip Webb, for those who know who that. And then here is the new front doorway, and made obviously by just widening the opening, but repeating the framing device, and then having a lobby inside so that the doors can be open when the building is open, and you still got draft protection, and then the downstand beams representing the line of the rooms which were there previously. And here you can see the rear wall of the original Toynbee Hall revealed within the new circulation. And I think that it's a magnificent way of giving orientation without needing to have signage and things, because you always know immediately, you see it, where you are in relation to that wall, not least because there's a glazed margin, so that you see the full height of the wall. At least you could see the full height of the wall until right at the last moment there were complaints about upskirting, and a form had to be applied to the underside. But it might be interesting just to point out, one or two of the extraordinary complications of this job, because you've got three different uses going on: the public use in the ground floor, the offices and meeting rooms in the upper floor, and then residential above that. And all of those have to be securely separate, as well as fire separate and means of escape separate. And that was a nightmare. The servicing, which comes from the plant room in the new extension, has to accommodate itself to being half a floor higher by the time it gets to serve the lecture room and the other room. And here, another little detail: there are three breakthroughs from the three rooms into the corridor. At this point, there's a slight slope up the corridor. So at this point, the threshold is level, but at this point, the threshold is sloping upwards. And I had to have quite a long argument with the builder before I said that all you had to do is to take a thick piece of wood and then carve it to a hyperbolic paraboloid, and it would work perfectly. And anyway, it does. So that's good. And here you see the white of the new building, or the off-white, and then the terracotta red and black of the 1880s building behind. The lecture room, as it is now, with a new oak floor and lighting following the suspended things which would have been there originally. And you'll see there's this wideband here with a bit of exposed services. And the reason for that is that when we got up there, we knew about the previous existence of the paintings around the frieze here by Archibald Ziegler from the 1930s, but everyone thought they'd been lost. Well, in fact, what happened is that they'd taken the panels off the frieze, they turned them through 180 degrees, and they'd refixed them with their face to the wall. So that these panels have now been salvaged, and after restoration or conservation, they may at some stage go back again, hiding the services I just talked about. And then here is Ashby Hall now. You'll see it's my pleasure I managed to get rid of that lighting track there, so you get the proper height for the frieze and the proper sense of the columns. Again, I can't tell you, I mean, the whole way through the job, I was saying to the builder, when are you going to take that down, that lighting track? And he said, oh, well, when we got the thing up for painting it. Well, of course, when we get up thing out to painting it, then the client says to us, oh, we think it's going to cause far too much trouble at this stage, and we want to miss it out. And so I think it was one of my greater diplomatic feats to overturn that instruction and get it done anyway. But you know, it's just pathetic. So here is the staircase after repair, really rather fascinating, wonderful. And on the right, there's one of the rooms, small rooms in the first floor, which has been consciously, as it were, treated as a heritage room and redecorated in its historic colors. And the reason we chose this one is that the fireplace is Elijah Hall, but someone probably 10 years later has added this rather lovely asymmetric set of shelves with tiles by William de Morgan. And so that's really rather nice, apart from the fact that one of the tiles got smashed by the builder and had to be replicated in Jacksfield Tileworks. So, I mean, just to conclude, the whole project was really about reinvention, not only of the building, but of Toynbee Hall itself and what it was stood for. And they decided to divest themselves of the residential side of their business and concentrate on the conferencing bit and the social care and welfare bit. And so I'm hoping that it's done the trick. It's certainly a handsome facility, but of course its conclusion coincided with COVID, so it's hardly actually got you going yet. Anyway, I move on to London Dock because it's a very different derelict building or building needing a new use. As you may know, London Dock was the with the East India Dock. It was the earliest of the docks, with the architect being Daniel Alexander, and the dock was mainly filled in, but two buildings of it survive. One is the tobacco dock, and the other is the so-called Pennington Street warehouse. Now, this is the docks as they were developed from 1805, And you'll see that you get the three basins leading into the western dock. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 warehouses, big warehouses along the north face. And then you get a continuous warehouse here, which is our building called the Pennington Street Warehouse. And if you look around the edge, you'll see this thick black line all the way around here. And the whole point about the enclosed docks was that before they were built, you brought your ship up the Thames as far as you could, and then you got loaded onto lighters, and you then unloaded onto the shore, and then you loaded onto a lorry, and then you loaded off a lorry onto the ground, and then lifted it into a warehouse. And then in that process, about 40% of it went missing. So they built these things with 20-foot high imperforate walls in order to deal with pilfering, and it was very successful. It killed it off entirely, but it's why you get this extraordinary landscape, or did, of solid walls. And it's slightly unusual in Pennington Street. This is Pennington Street warehouse in pink. There's the 5 warehouses and the basin with all its ships in it. And you can see that it's in 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half or 5 so-called areas with firewalls and cross walls between them. And it's on 2 levels, and the lower level is quite extraordinary. It is groin vaulted cellar the whole way, no light, no air. And the photograph on the right is the cellar in use for storing barrels, and this would have been a liquor warehouse with barrels, probably to exclusion of all else, as far as I'm aware. And then on the upper level, the walls are about 5 feet thick because it was intended that the warehouse should be 7 stories high, or was it 5 stories high? And they only stopped at 2, and so the upper floor is open to or was open to a timber truss roof. This is a post-war photograph, and this is what was known as Fortress Wapping, Murdoch's printing empire. And one reason it's a fortress is because the north wall of the Pennington Street warehouse is imperforate, and it's like a well, there it is. I mean, it is quite astounding. It's 5 areas, and each of which has got what appears to be an opening here, but isn't, and then 3 window openings here, which aren't, and then so it goes on the whole way. And we were very, very keen to keep the sense of this sort of extraordinary brick wall. We now believe that the reason the upper floors were never built was because the warehouse wall was, or the Pennington Street warehouse was built first, and therefore its wall acted as the wall, and you just had temporarily some of these open to allow the construction of the other buildings in the site. But by the time they built all of those, they decided not to build on top of this one, if you follow me. And then on the other side of the warehouse, you get projections here, which you can see there's a sort of impost block of stone here, and that's because there were bridges across here to link this to the warehouses opposite. And each area actually finishes in the middle of this, so they had a gable at each end. But in this case, bomb damage, they've lost the gables. This was the way it looked inside. The only bit of the original construction you could really see was in this one corridor. Everything else was converted and Anyway, the purpose of the scheme was to create a usable space in the different areas, and secondly, to create public entrance through the site. And so our plan was to make a cut through and then have a lift and stairs in the cut through, leading to a demise on one side and a demise on the other side. And then to get light and air into the lower areas by having a cut through in each demise, and then to put roof lights over the cut through and over the secondary cut throughs as roof lights on the top. And so just looking at one of the areas, then here is the cut through. Here is the circulation coming through, with the lift being right bang on the crossing of the two axes and the stair wrapping around it. And then we had enough trusses, historic trusses, to be able to reuse them just over the cut through. And then elsewhere, the roof had been rebuilt with steel ones, which we strengthened but didn't replace. I think we can skip that one. This is a model exploring the spatial qualities, and particularly the light. And so with the roof light here and the cut throughs here, in 3 positions, we were reasonably confident that the lighting would be adequate. And then there were actually 2 sorts of cut through. There's one which happens on the face of the columns, and then there's another one which doesn't. And here's the lift shaft coming up through the middle, and the drawing at planning stage, giving a sense of the space which would be created. So we were working on our plans for this when Patel Taylor were working on their plans for a mega development up to, I don't know, 27 stories down to 7 and up to 15 or something, all designed around courtyards facing south of the river, but the space between them aligned with the gables where the 2 areas meet. Then Patel Taylor had this ridiculous idea of wanting to take a canopy from their building, which is here, and use that as a roof over the first area. I always thought it was a ridiculous idea to try and link the 2 buildings in that way. And anyway, fortunately, that was abandoned by the client. So it went back to the way that we thought that it should be in the first place. Now, after stripping everything out, this is the wonderful array of columns. You see they're stone columns, each with a single monolith up to the joint, and then it's splaying out at the top to become the brick vault. And where the cut throughs were made, we revealed the shape of the top of these columns, which is a bit like a sort of lotus capital. And although we expected the ledge here, because that's what the brick arch sits on, we hadn't expected this extra stone here, but that stone is, in fact, fairly logically also abutting the brick springing of the vaults. And so we managed to work with it, but I do think they're absolutely beautiful, these things. Then ready for making the cut throughs, this is clearing out all the spoil on top of the vaults to reveal the top side of the brick vault below. And then this is the appearance at the end of the day. We have the the opening, which is actually open to the air, it's just a sliding metal screen gate. And then there's a lift core ahead of you, the staircase both sides, the reused brick trusses, the roof light above, and no attempt to reopen those openings there. And inside here is the landing that you reach from Pennington Street, and these great screens which are filling the space on both sides and underneath the arches. In making the cut throughs, we very, very much wanted not to have what the engineer wanted, which was just a big lump of concrete ring beam. And we have done it differently so that you have a reinforcement of this face here. And then this is literally the cross section of the brick bit of the vault. Although it had to be reset because it doesn't quite align with that, but you get the sense of the construction of what you see, and all of the screen isn't just a standard Schuko screen; it's back-to-back angles, so that you get a fine blade on the front. And here, these are back-to-back angles, and so again, the sense of a thin blade. And then balustrade, which is cantilevered out from the uprights, and a tactile handrail carved and wreathed out of the solid. That's looking up from the lowest level, showing how much light comes down through the glass floor and so on. And the wonderful shape of the top of the Capitol still on show. The wreath handrail, and our totemic column. And at the moment, the only tenant who's occupying one of the demises is John Thompson Associates, JTA. And they put in a mezzanine on top of that, but this is our cut through here, and they've done a nice job of respecting that sort of grittiness inside. This is their fit out of the louvres inside the vaults. So I think that counts as the entire opposite of Toynbee Hall. Toynbee Hall is about finishes and surface. That one's about WYSIWYG. It's about the reality of brick and steel and hard things like that. And we enjoyed that side of it very much. So I'm just going to finish. I'm sorry, I seem to be going on a bit too much, but I'll wrap it up fast. But just to touch on what's happening at the old Royal London Hospital, which is going to become the Tower Hamlets Town Hall. I'm a conservation consultant to AHMM, who are the main architects, and I had heard about this Georgian building in Whitechapel and never known where it was. And I don't suppose you do necessarily either, but the fact is that that's what you saw, but this is an 1890s chapel. This is an 1870s building by Charles Barry, and that in the middle between them is a fragment of what you can see of the Georgian Hospital, with extra floors put on and so on, and extra operating theatres put on. And so from here, the Georgian Hospital is in fact still there from there to there, but it's hidden. And this is what it was like. It was famous at the time as the most, it was called the London Hospital. And it's 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, 23 bays long. And fascinatingly, you get a series of rooms at the front, then you get a corridor, and you get wards at the back. So each ward has got a little privy. That one has that privy, that one has that privy, and similarly at the other end. And then this room is sort of shared by all three wards for a nursing station or something, I suppose. It was the toast of London at the time. And then this is how it got lost behind these later buildings, as I've described. This is the right up to the minute 1906 operating theatre, which was added on the an extra floor on top of the Georgian Hospital. And you can see timber mullions and transoms with lots and lots of light, and then roof lights with lots and lots of light. You needed lots and lots of light, and that's the way to get it. Then the 1906 staircases, which are rather extraordinary. They've got these bars around the outside, and they got this grillage above the handrail here, and you can't help thinking that that's intended to avoid people hurling themselves off the staircase. And this was the rear elevation, and when I first saw it, it took me a bit of time to realize that the Georgian elevation was still essentially intact, because it was a 3-story elevation, so 1, 2, 3. This was all added for the later on. But when you look at these, then first floor, dong, 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 dong. There's the rhythm of Georgian windows, still fairly intact. On this floor, 1 or 2 have been widened, but otherwise they're quite a lot the same. And you take away the balcony and the same thing happens here. So I did this diagram, which is really historical development sequence, but it very vividly shows the fact of how intact that Georgian elevation was. And the extraordinary thing was that the hospital had been sold to the Tower Hamlets on the basis of a feasibility study, which included knocking down the rear half of the Georgian Hospital, including the corridor, and just keeping the front range of rooms. And when I looked with HMM, I said, well, you know, we can't possibly do that, at least without not investigating the problems of saving all of it, and then having the atrium outside it and the new building in front of it. Anyway, that's what happened. And the plan of the new arrangement, here's the front rooms of the hospital, back rooms of the hospital, the 2 1906 staircases, the new, underneath the chapel, the new way through here. And then this is the council chamber, and then the atrium represented by the dotted line here, and then a separate entrance here, which leads to, well, the use of it is sort of kind of changing with time, and I think currently is at a library, but you're going down because the idea was to keep the whole of the elevation and go in underneath the historic elevation, and perversely, that works really rather well. It does mean you get a full 1.5 story height for the space, which is very, very generous space indeed. Then on the next floor up, you can see again the 2 ranges of rooms, the atrium wrapping around, showing the historic elevation, and then the offices for the town hall. Then this is the cross section through the site. This is a chapel. Yeah, this is the Georgian Hospital building with its central corridor. This is the atrium, and this is the council offices. And then another one further over, this is actually the section through those amazing operating theatres. And then the light, top light, comes down here to light this, and this is where it sets back. And the rear elevation, when you do the removal of the bricking up and some brick repair and keep the grain of this, actually looks pretty sensible, I think. And these are CGIs just showing how it might look, but without the proper brickwork. So this is just texture, but you get the setback here with, you know, a good sense of historic elevation and the historic door case. And this is the sort of state of work at the moment. This is the Georgian corridor. You can see the purpley bricks, which are the mid 18th century ones, and then the yellow bricks, which are the 1906 sort of ones. And you get wonderful things about the construction of Barry's building with the iron girders, iron joists between them, and then these are just iron straps holding up a clinker concrete. And then this is the one I really love. This is in the Graces wing, unfortunately now demolished, but this is the wall of the corridor. And so if you imagine there's a square space above here, and it's in fact a truss which goes from here to the other side, the equivalent pitch on the other side. So in fact, it's an inverted truss with cantilever action to support the corner here, which is then a lean-to with that. I mean, I thought that was, you know, sheer genius. And then some nice historic survivals. This is a bit of terracotta with some practicing repairs, which might get saved a bit on the third floor. And then this I particularly like. This is just underneath the trusses I just talked about. Zinc plates, which are stenciled out with a number, I believe, of the chimney flue to which they relate. So whether this is where you went to look for your hidden chimney sweep, I don't know, but it's a rather fantastic and evocative aspect of these buildings. And then Graces Wing is now built back again from a facade-only solution. And then just finally, a couple of little points. One about windows. We discovered this window which had been bricked up, and as quite often happened in the 1890s or 1900s, it was grained to look like hardwood. And so the color of the new windows is going to be a dark brown color. And that has the effect of making the window opening read as a reveal, and playing down the difference between the joinery and the window, which is very variable. And then this is how many people it takes to agree a color. This is people from the client, people from the Executive Authority Conservation Department, people from the architect, people from the client's inspecting architect, and here's the chap called, I think, and then as I say, the difference between the different types of brick. In this point here, you know, very fine brickwork, Georgian brickwork with Portland stone. And then the chapel, which was fitted out probably in 1906, actually built in 1890, but we think that this is 1906 fit out. Massive dry rot with water coming through, which will be repaired. But on the right here, I just wanted to show you that the where the water had been pouring down the wall, the panels here had been decayed, and I just love this. It's I call it a triptych, but it's 3 panels which have been removed, and what you see is the timber, the shreds of the rotten timber, with the mold of the blue-grey of the paintwork which was underneath it. And anyway, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, just a plug at the end. I've written a book about my work and working in old buildings. If you're interested, you can get it from my website at the reduced price of 20 quid using the code RGA20. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm looking to see if anyone's got any indication of wanting to ask a question. I can't see that at the moment. Is there anyone who would like to ask Richard a question? I notice we've taken up quite a lot of time. We've almost taken up the whole 60 minutes of what we'd originally intended. Oh, that's not a problem, but I just wonder if people have got time left now who might want to ask a question.
Mute.
John.
You can speak out. Oh, Olga, you would like to ask a question.
I was just interested to know, when are you hoping that this final one, the Old Royal London Hospital, that project will be completed?
I think we're talking about another year, and then there'll no doubt be a further period of fit out after the builder hands over before the council rally up and running. So because I'm not the main architect, then I just try and deal with conservation issues. But anyway, that's the sort of timescale.
And which of those buildings would be accessible now to the public? The earlier two, are they generally accessible to the public?
I believe that Toynbee Hall, you can see the main ground floor rooms if they're not being used for conferencing by just getting in touch and saying, can I arrange to have a look? Because it was a Heritage Lottery funded project, and therefore public benefit was built into that. They may or may not be open at a particular time during the week, but I'm afraid you'd have to check with them or their website. As far as the London Dock, then, as I said, the cut through is a public right of way, and therefore anyone can go along and walk through and peer into the screens to see John Thompson and to look closely at our staircase and lift.
Any more questions from anywhere?
There was something that came up from Tony, wasn't there?
Tony Edwards, yeah.
I think, Tony, if you want to ask a question, you need to unmute. Can you unmute at the bottom left of the screen? There's an option to mute or unmute.
Oh, yes. Hello. Can I just ask, Richard, you have a qualification in historic building conservation, or?
Yeah, there are two accreditation systems. There's the one that was set up first, called the Architect Accredited in Building Conservation, AABC, and they have a register. And then more recently, the RIBA set up their own competing one, which has different grades of qualification. So, I mean, it's a slightly strange position, but both of them are recognised by English heritage and people.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions from anywhere? I think.
What? No, Alison.
Yeah, Alison.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is probably a naive question because I've been retired as an architect for such a long time, but the old hospital seems quite large to be a town hall. Is that just because you need so many offices now for administration?
Well, I think it's not just a town hall. It's it's also now becoming like what used to be called a one-stop shop, where you go to pay your bills or whatever. Then there's a library, and then I believe there's a new children's add-on. So
thank you. Okay, thanks.
Would Toynbee Hall be a possibility for a visit, do you think, later on in the year?
Yeah, I'm sure it would. I mean,
That would be wonderful if a group of us could come with you.
yeah. I mean, there would be probably a reluctance to allow people into the offices or to the HMOs on the top floor. But having said that, the whole ground floor and looking at it from outside can be done. I gave a tour to the SPAB or someone, I think it was, and it worked out fine just looking at the ground floor on the outside.
No, that'd be, yes, there's so much of interest there. It's fascinating. Yes, maybe could contact you in a month or so, could I?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I don't have any particularly special access, but the chief executive, Jim Minton, is we're shortlisted for the Architect of the Year awards in for four buildings, which the three you've seen tonight, at least two of them are that. So he's coming to the dinner, so he owes me one.
Anyone else with a question? Kiko, you need to unmute.
Yes. Hello.
Oh, no,
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That was very interesting talk. Thank you very much. About the hospital. Sorry, I'm quite ignorant. But where is the hospital moved to now? And I understand that was a very historic hospital. And when I was doing a tour guiding, I heard that there was a museum and the elephant man's skeleton was kept in there. So what happened to all that?
Well, the new Royal London Hospital is just behind, to the south. When you go around the end of the old Royal London Hospital, you're seeing it. It's the one which is massive and it's sort of bright blue coloured, and you see it from everywhere. And it's designed by one of the big American firms, I seem to remember. And I think it's pretty disastrous. Certainly, I went to visit someone there and I couldn't find my way around. I always think that getting into a building and finding your way around ought to be intuitive, and that's what I hope we achieved at Toynbee Hall. But anyway,
yeah, a bit like a Barbican.
Yeah.
Can I have time for one? I just wondered what future projects are in the pipeline for you.
Well, good question. The main one you'd be interested to know about is that you may know that Eric Parry is rebuilding or building some of the new cybercrime courts on the south side of Fleet Street. And it's a massive project. And then there's another, big police station, and then there's another big office block. There's a square, and the square is formed by demolishing or enlarged by demolishing some buildings which are next to the only listed building on the site, and therefore it exposes the party wall of that building, which was never designed to be seen. And so I won a mini competition to design a new elevation for the listed building, which is actually rather like Norman Shaw. It's 1880s. It's red brick. It's got great Queen Anne style gables and things like that. And anyway, so I'm doing a Queen Anne elevation in the middle of the city. So that's going to be exciting. Yeah. And then I may be doing some work both at Clare College, Cambridge, and St John's College, Oxford. But those are really right at their early stages. So several things finishing, but not as much starting as I'd like. to be honest. So if you've got a,
Thank you.
let me know.
Thank you.
I can see that Philip, you've got a hand raised. You'd like to ask.
Just rather obscure question. And the painter you referred to having his paintings uncovered called Ziegler. I think his daughter was in my class with me at school, and I was told that her father was a painter, but I never knew what sort of paintings he did. Is there anything you can say about him?
I know very little about him, although there was a fairly comprehensive report done on the history of him, paintings and so on, by Alan Baxter's, which ought to be on the public record, I would have thought, or you could get hold of it from them. All I therefore know really is having looked at the paintings, and they're rather extraordinary sort of pastoral scenes of beautiful boys and beautiful girls, because the frieze is rather low. They're all languidly lying full length.
So they're still there, are they? So you can see them now, or they?
They're probably in store somewhere at the moment, but they certainly are, valued and protected, and are awaiting funds to put them back again, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any more questions from anyone? Or have we reached the end of the line? I think I can't see anyone wanting to ask a question. So I'd just like to thank you on behalf of the club, Richard, for giving us such an interesting talk.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
It sounds a bit odd, but I just wonder if we can give you a Zoom clap. That's thank you very much.
Visible clap.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to end the meeting now, if that's okay with everybody, and say goodbye.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye,
very much.
everybody.
That's
Thank you.
great.
Bye.
Thank you.